Welcome to Digital Fatalism, the podcast. It's a short series documenting different perspectives from artists, activists, and researchers about what digital fatalism means. How does it function as an ideology? How does it manifest in different digital tools and platforms and processes? How is it internalized? How does it affect our relationship and interpretation of new technologies? The reason why I'm doing this is because it's a key term for me in my PhD research at Newcastle University, and I'm approaching this through creative practice as an artist and working out how to expose and challenge instances of digital fatalism that appear through algorithmic and computational systems that make decisions and judgments about ultimately who we are. In this first episode, I'm so happy to be talking with Geert Lovink, the founding director of Institute of Network Cultures, media theorist, internet critic, and author of many books, including Uncanny Networks, Dark Fiber, and Social Media Abyss, among others. Do read them if you haven't already. We start our conversation talking about Jean Baudrillard's book, Fatal Strategies. The Dutch translation of this came out in the mid-1980s and became a really important text for Lovink and for the groups that he was a part of. So we begin our conversation with when this book came out and his early engagement with this text.
At the time, we had a kind of an autonomous theory collective. It was called Adilno, which you can still find on the networkcultures.org website, the archive of it, which is the foundation for the advancement of illegal knowledge. And we were giving some kind of classes or reading groups in squads using this book of Jean Baudrillard, which at the time, of course, and maybe still is, quite a kind of a clash of cultures. If you think of, let's say, the radical, politically correct people, activists, feminists, and then being confronted with this kind of a late or post-situationist thinker, which, there's something to be said for that. Baudrillard was like that. But for these classes, we produced this small booklet, and it's called Odd Dictionary, that tried to explain all the different terms for the reader that it was really not very familiar with what this book was all about. And of course, the main idea that we had to discuss time and again, what this idea of the fatum, the Latin word for fate, what a fate actually is, because we are so unfamiliar with it, and that you are kind of defined, or that you are lived by your fate. And so this is important because when we're talking about digital fate, of course, this is a kind of an update, if you like, 30 years later, of this idea of the fatal strategy, which, by the way, is, of course, a paradox, right? Because a strategy is something that you plan, and the fate is that it's just happening to you. So how can you plan a fate? This is the kind of irony of the writings of Baudrillard. This tension is there, right? It's even there in the digital fate, because the fate just happens, right? It's not planned. You have no idea about it. It just overcomes you, basically. There is a certain necessity. There's almost a procedural knowledge of things that will unfold, or will have to unfold over time. And this is the kind of inevitability of processual thinking, because when there's digital fate, it means that there is this inevitability of steps, right? It's the opposite thinking of, let's say, the tree model, right? In the tree model, at every node, at every point, we have the possibility. We can, go this way or that way, and sometimes you even have 3 or 4 or 5 options, depending on the tree. In digital fatalism, there is nothing like that. And so it kind of also describes a little bit the feeling many people have when they try to reflect on them being inside a complex system, a bureaucratic system very often, or medical system, or a computer system for that matter, or a computer network or whatever, right? And so this is the issue. And people get lost, but they don't really see that their path is quite mechanistic, in fact, and is already described quite well. It feels more like a jungle, but according to the digital fate that was called upon you, the steps are quite clear. In fact, there is no such thing as a jungle in that sense where you have no idea. The idea is that you have to go through all these steps. The thing is, you can't really get out, right? So there's no exit.
So, if you had to describe what digital fatalism is, how would you summarize that?
There's a sense of loss of agency. We are not the designers, even as participants or as users. We are not really fully in control of where we are and where we go. And in the real world, especially young people would love to have options. Everything. We could go to this nightclub, we could go to that cafe, we could get a movie and so on, right? So this is kind of what I call the optionalism of the weekend, where you have the whole world is there and you could do 1,000 things, so to say. In these systems, there's still an enormous amount of stuff happening, but there's no option. There is no option. So, and this is a radical contrast to the belief that you as a neoliberal subject, that you are still in charge of something, and that this world is an infinite collection of things that are on offer, that are options. Maybe at best there is there's the menu that is offered, right? You can choose 1, 2, or 3, but you already know that the menu is fake, because in the end you will talk to the same operator. The menu is already offered to you, like, okay, man, do you want to wait 5 minutes, 10 minutes, or 12 or something? It doesn't really matter, right? Because in the end you will talk to the same operator. And so this kind of thinking in menu, we're already deeply frustrated about, because they are not real options.
Historically, where do you see the roots of digital fatalism being? How far back does this go? And what are your thoughts on how the situation has changed over time?
The idea that the internet is democratizing and is promising to liberate the individual, that it is a possibility, a place, a stage where you can change your identity and your destiny in that sense. Especially also in terms of gender, of course, but also of race or class background, or any type of background that you bring with you. The initial idea was that you could leave that behind, that you could put on another mask and really become a second, third, or even fourth self. You could almost infinite change. And all this, of course, no longer the case. And people, unless they have a really very clever kind of PR strategy, they are not at all anymore, making use of the original possibilities of the internet to have parallel virtual lives.
How are you feeling in terms of a shifting scale from optimism to pessimism towards challenging digital fatalism and opportunities for exercising agency?
Well, the digital fatalism these days many people in my circles, of course, associate that with accelerationism. Like, just forget about it, just accelerate the collapse of the system, and that's probably the only possible thing. So if you embrace the digital fatalism, this is the position you come into fairly quickly. I think at the time, Baudrillard would not have phrased it in such a way. Fatal strategy is more inclined to not look for the life after collapse, but the beauty of the metamorphosis, right? So he is emphasizing this ability through the fatal strategy to, in the end, then reappear or re-emerge as a complete other entity. But in a way, the accelerationists, they're much darker in that sense. And that's got to do with what we call the stack of crises, from climate change to growing social inequality, the housing crisis, floodings, drought, you name it. And then there's even a stack of them, because then they start to interfere and interrelate all these crises. And that's what happens when things, what they in France call, and when they study this through the lens of collapsology, this is the science of the collapse, and this is what they study. And so it is about forms of collapse. And so the digital fatalism is basically about a system that inevitably collapses. And then Baudrillard already in his time made that distinction between, do you want the explosion or the implosion? And then, he describes the social, for instance, as a system that in this time was bound to implode, and not like the leftist, revolutionaries thought that it would explode, in the form of a revolution or whatever, right? He already saw that these systems are bound to implode in a slow and very cruel way.
Do you think that digital fatalism itself is inevitable?
That's a hard question, because digital fatalism is, of course, designed. It's not like, digital fatalism is something that just occurs, right? Of course, you could say, there are outside forces and they just, like a flooding, something like that, or a meteorite that hits the earth, or something, right? Some completely unexpected thing. And that makes an end to all this processual thinking and ways that these cybernetic systems all work and create feedbacks and are interrelated to each other and so on. All that then suddenly stops and collapses. But if we exclude those very sudden external kind of forces, is there an internal logic? And if there is an internal logic that would cause that, has this internal logic been designed? Has this code been written? If so, by whom? Is this something that this group, these hackers or designers or programmers, did they think of that? Did they already include that into the code? Or is it something that is just happening because they didn't quite think it through? They didn't. So then it's still kind of an unintended consequence, which in my logic, in my understanding, is still something that comes from within and not so much from outside. And that's just a question of where do complex systems become so complex that they start to slow down and no longer properly work And Bernard Stiegler, another French philosopher, of course, really thought this through, and throughout his work, he was occupied with this idea of entropy of systems, and that is another, let's say, motive that we could bring into play here. So the entropy just becomes so big in these complex systems that basically, they no longer work.
Actually, I did have one final thing I wanted to ask you about, if you don't mind, and that's about your concept of extinction internet. And could you explain a little bit about what you mean by that?
Well, that's just another one of those potent biological metaphors that we just use to cross-pollinate, our own humanistic concepts that we have. In this case, the network or the medium, for that matter. The internet in this case. And so extinction internet is basically the end of an era of possibilities. So where the kind of idea is that the internet develops itself, and then there's a new invention, there's a new app, let's say, direction in which this digital technology can go into, right? And especially when you come from the 80s and you've witnessed and lived all these arrivals of new ideas and new concepts that fundamentally changed. The biggest one, of course, being the invention of the World Wide Web in the early 90s, but then also I don't know what payment systems on top of that, or 3D spaces. Now we have artificial intelligence, and so on and so on. Right? The extinction internet is the point where people just stop thinking, where it's kind of no longer useful, or it no longer has any effect to develop new concepts or new technologies, where things just fall flat and basically get in a very advanced form of stagnation, recession, regression, right? And so there is no more so-called progress in that sense, or difference. It's not one of the original definitions of information is the difference that makes a difference. But what happens when you add difference and it no longer makes a difference, or when you add differences and it all kind of becomes one blurry, huge, undifferentiated pot of indifference. This is kind of where in my thesis, approximately around 2015 or 16, there's that kind of, let's say, this turn in the internet culture, in which it started to implode and turn against itself. And then this phase of extinction internet is really the last phase of its disappearance. At first, it disappeared into the infrastructure, the data centers, etc. It's no longer visible. People no longer have servers. They don't even have, often they don't even have a personal computer anymore at home. People, up to 80%, I believe, are now accessing the internet solely through their smartphones. And so there you see that it starts to become part of your body. It starts to become very intimate, and you literally wear it on your body. It becomes part of yourself, the digital self. But on the other hand, it's also invisible. It's invisible because of the Wi-Fi. There are no more cables. Surveillance systems are so sophisticated and invisible that you don't even notice them, but they notice you. And so this becoming invisible of the internet infrastructure and the centralization of it in the hands of few inevitably leads to this point where people no longer think that you could change this system or that it could be redesigned in a completely different way. No, all these kind of possibility spaces, as I call them, they have been closed. So that is the moment of extinction internet.
This podcast is being supported by Northern Bridge Consortium, which is funded by the Arts and Humanities Research Council.